Let's get back to Nigeria's GDP, which is what the economists, analysts, and public affairs commentators have been swarming over the second quarter numbers released yesterday by the Statistics Office. Broadly speaking, some of the post-GDP analysis released by investment firms have been positive. Analysts at Vertiva Capital wrote that the second quarter GDP was, quote, a better shot at recovery, while Commercial Partners report released yesterday described the second quarter GDP as a consolidating recovery, but with expectations that Nigerians should grow at a slower pace going forward. Speaking to the facts behind the figures GDP, on the show with me tonight is Dr. Franklin Ngwu, who is the Director of Sustainability at the Lagos Business School, and also from Ajuri Ngelale, who is the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Public Affairs. Ajuri, good evening. It's good to have you from our Abuja studios, and live here from Lagos. Here with me is Dr. Franklin Ngwu. Good evening, gentlemen, to both of you. Thank you very much. Let me just start with you, Prof. What is your broad overview of the latest second quarter GDP numbers?
Thank you for having me. Of course, is a positive news. Is a news that we've been expecting and that we need. However, it also means that if you look at other details about the GDP, it means that we have to work a lot harder because, of course, you know, what we announced as 5.1 was more or less from 2020 to now, comparing second quarter of 2020 to second quarter of 2021. But when you now look at from half-year report, it's 2.7 something growth. And when you now look at quarter to quarter, it also means that a lot of hard work is supposed to be done in terms of sustaining the growth, in terms of also engaging the private sector a lot more to ensure that we maintain a sustainable growth. And when you now also look at it that we have, the population is also growing rapidly. It means that as long as the population growth is higher than the GDP growth, there is a challenge. Poverty will continue to increase, unemployment will continue to increase, and other challenges. So in a summary, is a positive development that needs to be sustained, that needs to be managed properly to ensure that we continue to grow.
Oh, thank you, Professor Dr. Ngwu. You've given me what you call the figures. Let me ask Ajuri to give me what you call the facts behind the figures. That's what we do on the stock market, by the way. You get a listed company, then you have your financials, then you tell the market. How do you arrive at the figures? That's what you call facts of figures. So my question to you, Ajuri, is what actions do you think we've been able to take to rescue the economy through the pandemic period of 2020 into the end of the second half of the year, which was June?
Thank you very much, both Professor and Mr. Boasen, for having me on the program. After listening to the submission, I would just add, really, that one of the things that we're quite excited about when we dig into the numbers is the extent to which the non-oil sector and really the labor-intensive subsectors of the economy have really weighed in a much greater fashion than what we've seen in the previous several years in terms of rate of growth. For example, we saw within the GDP report that we achieved nearly double-digit growth in the services sector. That's something that we're quite excited about, particularly because we haven't seen that rate of growth of about 9.2% since 2010, over a decade now. Then, of course, we saw that the contribution of the non-oil sector to the GDP grew at about 6.7%, the largest since the third quarter of 2014. But really, it tells the larger story of the evolution, and it is a process. We are not at the finish line, and I want to emphasize that. But it tells the story of an evolution of a more inclusive economy. That you have sectors that historically have brought in large capital because they're capital intensive but not labor intensive, like the oil and gas sector. Well, within this report, it showed a dip in the oil and gas numbers. Yet we were able to achieve 5% growth on the strength of the contribution of the non-oil sector. As far as steps that this administration under President Muhammadu Buhari had taken to achieve these kinds of results, and hopefully to achieve even better results in future quarters, is, of course, course, the implementation of the 2.3 trillion naira economic sustainability plan, in which we directly empowered indigenous Nigerian companies who employ indigenous Nigerian labor, who use indigenous Nigerian raw materials to construct homes across the nation, about 17,000 homes currently under construction, tens of thousands of workers on that. Then, of course, the larger scale interventions where you had the 774,000 young people being empowered with locally produced raw materials from local vendors across the local governments to reconstruct rural roads. We've been able to link about 500 markets over the course of the last few months during that program. And then, of course, with the Survival Fund, we've been able to safeguard, sustain, and increase the job, the employment figure at about 1.3 million jobs saved through the Survival Fund.
Yes, I think give it to the government, and I think the World Bank, a lot of other agencies have spoken very well about how the administration was able to move in very quickly last year and mitigate the full impact of the COVID-19. But let me lean a little bit further on Dr. Ngwu here about what the private sector looked at in the first 6 months of the year, and what do you see? Even within this first 6 months, we're seeing banks declaring huge profit. By the way, you see Zenith Bank declaring 30 kobo dividend per share. So the numbers are coming in really good. Even the first quarter, when everyone thought it was going to be really bad, the banks, for example, were able to tell you decent numbers. Dr. Ngwu, please.
Of course, it's a good development in the sense that 2020, the year where the global economy and Nigerian economy was more or less locked down. So expectedly, with the easing of the economy and with the vaccine, with opening up of the economy, of course, it's expected that things will start growing. But however, the question then that we're supposed to ask is, what are the sectors that are growing? So if you look at the GDP growth, for example, the key sectors that are growing are more or less trade, agriculture, transportation, and all that. So what we are supposed to look at is, what are the sectors that are growing and what are the sectors that are not growing? And how can we enhance the growth of the sectors that are growing? And what are the challenges of the sectors that are not growing very well? And then how do we now bring about better public-private partnership to ensure that the private sector is properly included to sustain this growth? But of course, the government cannot do it alone, because Nigeria is also relatively big. And given our revenue, our debt, and other factors, it means that the government cannot really sustain this growth.
But when we come back from after the break, but just before that, let me give you about 30 seconds or so, Ajuri, to talk about macroeconomic reforms and actions that you think we need to. We all agree that this is work in progress, GDP, by the way. So we say thank you, everyone. Nice job. But then we need to fast track the current growth levels, create jobs very quickly, and move on. You touched on about some of this earlier, but what are the brick and mortars that we need to see or that is currently taking place?
Well, I would just very humbly disagree with my brother's assertion that the growth is not sustainable. And the reason why is because most of the investments we're making are in unlocking the infrastructural bottlenecks that have held back foreign direct investment in this country for decades. The reason why, for example, transportation is one of the heavily weighing improvements in terms of the contribution to GDP growth is because of the fact that we have been able to unlock private capital with Executive Order 007 and other initiatives.
Hold your thought there, Ajuri, respectfully to you and Dr. Ngwu. We'll come back after the break. We'll take it right from where you stop. Yeah, we're getting a clearer picture of our GDP figures as we talk about certain aspects of the broad Nigerian economy. Thank you very much, Ajuri Ngelale, Senior Special Advisor to the President on Public Affairs, and Dr. Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School. Ajuri, just continue very quickly. We talk about sustainable GDP. How do we have a GDP that is sustainable at what levels? You're just talking about that before the break. Then I get Dr. Ngwu to react.
Yes, thank you very much once again, Boyson. So we've been able to unlock private capital. We've said, look, these infrastructural bottlenecks that have been really an albatross around the neck of this country for decades, that we can't just attack this the traditional ways. We have to be innovative and creative in our thinking about how we're going to finance the disruption of these bottlenecks. So that's why you've seen, in addition to unprecedented public sector investment, government budgetary allocation to infrastructure projects from roads, bridges, airports, seaports, power plants, dams, and the like. What we've now done with Executive Order 007, for example, is provide calibrated tax reliefs to companies like Dangote, MTN, Lafarge, and others who are ready to bring their capital, NLNG is another one, to bring their capital to build large-scale infrastructure like Boni Bodo Road in the south-south connecting NLNG on Bonny Island to the mainland for the first time in the history of the country, like Apapa Oworonshoki Tollgate Road that Dangote is doing with their cement technology. And then we now provide calibrated tax relief over the next several years. What this allows us to do is it allows us to attack it from the two sides. And in addition to that, of course, it's not a secret that we've raised huge amounts of money from investors on the bond market through the Sukuk bonds. Just last year, we issued an additional 162 billion naira that's reconstructing 44 federal highways across the nation. So this is how you get sustainable job creation, great. Number one, but then attracting the factories and industries that will employ Nigerians over the long term.
Yes, yes. So, Dr. Ngwu, I'm going to ask you, here is Nigeria talking about what you call the brick and mortar. For example, Nigeria is going to shop for $6.2 billion, the first set of tranche next month in September from the global debt market. So do you see these huge investments, tax credit and what have you, as the building blocks of what you call the sustainable GDP growth moving forward?
Of course, you know that the interventions from the government are good. However, when you rethink so many factors, you begin to wonder, are they really sustainable? So the question is, if we are raising bond, if we are issuing school bond, if we are borrowing, currently we are spending about 91% of our revenue on servicing debt. So that means it's not really sustainable. But what will make it more sustainable is when we start growing our revenue, when we start inviting the private sector to be more or less driving the economy. It is on record that the federal government is trying to do too much. And for us to have a sustainable economy, the federal government needs to more or less rethink their involvement in economic development and see how they can create a very sustainable business environment that will enable private sector to take a driver's seat and move the economy forward. It is not the responsibility or the functions of the federal government to be doing everything that they want to do. Central bank wants to do everything, the government wants to do everything. It cannot be sustainable because they don't have the money, they don't have the capacity, they don't have what it requires to use.
So that takes us to investment, both locally and from foreign investors and business confidence. Where are we on these two metrics right now? Let me allow you to continue very quickly, Professor Dr. Ngwu.
So you find out that just as if you read what NNPC GMD said, he said of the $50 billion that came to Sub-Saharan Africa, only $3 billion came to Nigeria. So it means that the investors are still worried and they are still not, the confidence is still not there. And of course, you know, when we move into 2022 and we are more or less going into election year, the confidence will still go down. So there is a need for the government to really communicate and signal to the private sector in some of the things they are doing and also reassure them that they are supposed to partner with them to achieve what they want to achieve. Recently in LBS, we organized a public sector dialogue, and the private sector told us clearly that there is a gap between the public sector and the private sector, and that gap needs to be narrowed in terms of building confidence, in terms of building trust, in terms of more or less seeing them as partners in this progressive development of Nigeria. Okay,
so in terms of this confidence, are you confident by the NNPC posting nearly 300 billion naira profit? Professor Ngwu, 30 seconds.
Of course, that they've posted positive report is very good. However, when you break it down, you begin to wonder. It means that from the report that we released, they said that the profit actually came mainly from cost adjustment or minimization, which is good. But what is important is most of the subsidiaries of NNPC still declared loss. And also, the refineries are not working. So the question then is, how will NNPC sustain this profit that they've achieved in terms of all their subsidiaries, and particularly in the subsidiaries?
Okay, great. Ajuri, here is a nearly 300 billion naira that Mr. President says is the NNPC profit after tax. Congratulations. And I will say that looks like a whole lot of money on the table. If you put it in these studios, I'm sure there'll still a whole lot of room left. I won't be able to have a place to sit. So it looks like a whole lot of money on the ground. But do you think this latest profit how does it fit into the broader petroleum industry reform via the PIA? And do you see this as a game changer moving forward?
Thank you very much. So very quickly, I just want to address the fact that during my brother's statements, he neglected to mention what I laid out earlier, which was how the federal government is actively courting private sector resources to break these infrastructural bottlenecks, roads, bridges, and all of these other things. We are actively doing that. So the notion that government is trying to do everything and not including the private sector is fundamentally false. The other issue is this statement about 91% of our revenue being spent on debt servicing. It's very important that we contextualize our statements. That 91% of our revenues being spent on debt servicing is a snapshot in time of a year in which we have suffered a once-in-a-century global pandemic. We had oil production shut down, embargoes on oil shipments globally because of oversupply on the international market. And of course, that is the centerpiece of our economy. Naturally, our revenues will be unusually depressed, right? At a time when our debt servicing obligations that go back decades, all right, have mounted up over decades, they don't change, right? So if you have small revenue and then the servicing remains the same, naturally, a huge amount of your revenue will now be spent on servicing in a way that it wouldn't in a normal year. So we'll see at the end of 2021 and 2022 what that ratio will look like. With that said, my brother, to the issue of the oil sector, the NNPC GMD's statement on the issue of $50 billion coming into the African continent and only $4 billion coming to Nigeria. The context of what he was saying was not to say that investors don't want to come to Nigeria. What he was saying was this non-assent of the Petroleum Industry Act is costing Nigeria billions of dollars. And the reason why it's so historic and so important and so beneficial to the future of the country that President Muhammadu Buhari assented to this act, which was produced in consultation with the same international oil companies, is that now we're going to take a much larger share of the investment coming into the continent in future years. So it was contextual in that regard. Now, when you look at the reforms within the NNPC, the refineries that we're talking about are now undergoing full reconstruction, right? In partnership with the Afrexim Bank. This is not like the 2001 effort under a previous administration where they just basically siphoned off a whole bunch of money through one crony of government to pretend to do refinery construction. This is a real deal international partnership between Afrexim Bank, the federal government of Nigeria, and an internationally respected contractor. So we're really moving in the right direction.
Okay, we're moving in the right direction. So I'm going to ask Professor Ngwu and Ajuri for their final thoughts. Professor Ngwu, at what speed do you think we should move? 100 kilometers per hour, 120 kilometers per hour before we have the road safety people asking us to slow down. What is your take? GDP level moving forward, third quarter, fourth quarter.
I think we should move beyond 200 meters per hour. We need to move fast because the poverty rate is increasing, unemployment is increasing, insecurity is increasing. So what we need to do is to partner more. I appreciate that the federal government is trying to partner the private sector, but they need to do it more. Okay, and they need to move the GDP to about double-digit growth.
Double digit? That starts from 10. Ajuri, exactly. Give me 10. Yeah, do you agree with 10% GDP numbers moving forward?
We should never settle for less than double-digit GDP growth every quarter of every year moving forward.
I love
the reason why is after you've looked at the...
I love that because we agree that we need a double-digit. Now we're doing about 5.01%. Yes. I'm sure we're not far from double-digit, by the way. I'm hopeful.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your insights and perspectives tonight on the show. Ajuri Ngelale, Senior Special Advisor to the President on Public Affairs, and Dr. Franklin Ngwu, Director of Sustainability at the Lagos Business School. Thank you both. Enjoy your weekend. Let's have this conversation some other time, shall we?